A principal ordered the removal of the statue of the Virgin Mary from the school. Everyone asked him not to do it. He didn't listen. What happened after that shocked the entire city. A miracle of the Virgin Mary that no one saw coming. And what you're about to hear will make you question everything you think about coincidences. But before we continue, leave a comment saying where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I'd love to see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary are reaching. You know that type of person who never questions their own decisions, who looks at you and makes it clear there's no room for negotiation? Richard Coleman was like that, 52 years old, principal of a school in rural Oregon for almost 15 years. The kind of man who walked into a room and silence followed, not out of respect, out of tension. And look, he wasn't a bad person. He wasn't cruel, just too practical, too objective. It was a Tuesday in October when Richard stopped in the school's central courtyard. The statue was there, as it had always been. The Virgin Mary, arms open, on a concrete pedestal right in the middle of the garden. About 6.5 feet tall, a blue mantle faded by the sun, a crack on the right side, the base stained with moss growing in the corners. Have you ever noticed how we pass by certain things every day and eventually stop seeing them? Richard walked past that statue 2-3 times a day for years. He had never really paid attention until that day. He stopped, looked, noticed the crack was bigger than he remembered, the base truly unstable, the pedestal leaning slightly to one side. George Mitchell, the janitor, was sweeping nearby, 71 years old. He had worked at that school since Richard was a child. Completely white hair, hand shaking slightly as he held the broom. But he never missed a day. "George?" Richard called. The janitor lifted his head. "Yes, Mr. Coleman?" George replied. "This statue, how long has it been like this?" Richard asked. George looked at the Virgin Mary as if he were looking at an old friend. "Like what, sir?" the janitor asked. "Cracked. Unstable base. How long?" Richard insisted. "Oh." George scratched his head. "The crack showed up about 5 years ago. After that strong windstorm, remember? The base. It's always been a little crooked," he explained. Richard walked around the pedestal, gently pushed it with his foot. It wobbled. "This is dangerous. If a student gets hurt here, we could face a lawsuit," Richard said. "But Mr. Coleman, she's been here since," George began. "Since when?" Richard cut him off. 1947. "When the school was renovated," the janitor replied. Richard looked at the statue again, not with affection, with calculation. "Almost 80 years. It needs a complete restoration," Richard concluded. "I can take care of it, sir. Clean it. Fix the base," George offered. "No, George. This needs a specialist. Structure, paint, everything." "We're talking about a lot of money," Richard replied. The silence weighed heavily. "The lab computers are 8 years old. The desks in Wing B are broken," Richard explained. "But, sir," George tried. "It's just a statue, George," Richard said coldly. The janitor opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "With all due respect, Mr. Coleman, for many people here it's not just a statue," George said softly. "I understand, but my responsibility is to the safety and education of the students, not to feelings," Richard replied. Richard was already turning to leave when George spoke quietly. "And what if we raise the money? Donations?" the janitor suggested. "No." The word came out dry, final. "Friday, I'll have it removed." "It'll go to storage. If anyone wants it, they can take it," Richard announced. "Mr. Coleman, please," George pleaded. But Richard was already walking away. Firm steps. Decision made. Do you know that feeling? When you know something is wrong but pretend you don't know? George stood still, staring at the statue of the Virgin Mary. The broom slipped from his hand. On Thursday afternoon, Margaret Foster walked down the hallway and noticed the light on in Richard's office. He was alone, as he always stayed after hours. She knocked on the door, 63 years old, a literature teacher for 40, retired 3 years ago, but still visited often. She had been a student at this school in the 50s. "Richard?" Margaret said. He looked up from the computer. "Margaret." "What a surprise," Richard replied. "I heard about the statue," she said. "News travels fast," Richard commented. "Is it true? Are you going to remove it?" Margaret asked. "Friday morning," Richard confirmed. Margaret sat down without being invited. "May I know why?" she asked. "Cracked, dangerous, no funds to restore it," Richard replied matter-of-factly. "And what if we get the funds?" Margaret suggested. "I already told George it's not a priority," Richard said firmly. "Priority." Margaret repeated the word slowly. "Richard, do you know the history of that statue of the Virgin Mary?" "It was donated in 1947, he answered. "It was donated by the Sullivan family. The mother, Catherine Sullivan, was a teacher here. She had a daughter who became gravely ill when she was still very young. The doctors gave no hope. Catherine was devoted to the Virgin Mary. She prayed every day in front of a small image she had at home," Margaret recounted. Margaret paused, looking out the window toward the courtyard. The girl recovered, gradually, against all expectations. Catherine said she had made a promise. If her daughter survived, she would donate a statue of the Virgin Mary to the school, so that other families would never lose hope. She worked for 2 years doing extra hours to be able to pay for the statue. And she kept her promise, Margaret concluded. "It's a beautiful story, Margaret, but it doesn't change the fact that the statue is dangerous and—" Richard began. "It's not about the statue, Richard," Margaret interrupted. "Then what is it about?" Richard asked. "About respect, about memory, about—" "Oh, forget it." Margaret stood up. "You won't understand anyway." "Margaret," Richard tried. "I studied at this school, Richard. My children studied here. My granddaughter is in 2nd grade now. That statue has always been there. In graduation photos. On the first days of school. In difficult moments," Margaret said, emotional. She stopped at the door. "Margaret, Richard began. "Just don't destroy it, Richard. If you don't want it here anymore, give it to me. I'll take it to my house," Margaret asked. "It's going to storage. Anyone who wants it can—" Richard replied. "Storage!" Margaret laughed without joy. "Of course, storage." And she left. Richard was left alone in the office. He looked out the window. The statue was there, in the middle of the courtyard. Some students walked by. None paid attention. See? It's just a statue. But then why was he feeling like this? The truck arrived early. 2 men with ropes and equipment. George was there, standing off to the side, doing nothing, just watching. Richard got out of the car and waved to the men. "You can start," Richard said. They tied the ropes, began loosening the statue from its base. Some teachers arriving stopped. They watched from a distance. No one said anything. Margaret was on the sidewalk, arms crossed, eyes red. 7:15. The statue of the Virgin Mary was lifted, carefully placed in the back of the truck. Covered with a tarp, George had tears on his face. Richard saw it, pretended he didn't. 7:20. The truck left. "Have you ever done something that everyone around you knew was wrong, but you insisted anyway?" Richard went into the school, ignored the looks, went to the office, closed the door, turned on the computer. Normal work. Normal Friday. 2:40 in the afternoon, the phone rang. "Mr. Coleman?" A female voice on the other end. "Yes," Richard answered. "This is the hospital." "Are you the son of Robert Coleman?" the attendant asked. The world stopped. "I am. What happened?" Richard said, tense. "Your father was admitted about an hour ago. Critical condition." "Can you come immediately?" she said urgently. Richard barely hung up, grabbed the keys. Ran. The hospital was 20 minutes from the school. Richard made it in 12. Ran into the emergency room, found the reception desk. "Robert Coleman, where is he?" Richard asked, out of breath. "3rd floor." "But, sir—" The receptionist began. He was already running for the stairs. Third floor, white corridor, smell of alcohol and fear. A young doctor came toward him. "Mr. Coleman," she asked. "Where is my father?" Richard said, desperate. "Room 6. But first I need—" The doctor tried. "Later." Richard cut her off. Richard pushed the door open. His father was on the bed. Tubes, machines, face far too pale. 81 years old, retired for 15. Widowed for 8. Lived alone in a small house. Stubborn, independent, never asked for help with anything. And now he was there, unconscious. "Dad?" Richard called. "Nothing." "Dad, I'm here," he said, voice trembling. Nothing. The doctor entered behind him. "Mr. Coleman, I'm Dr. Sandra. Your father had a heart attack, a severe one. We managed to stabilize him, but—" she explained. "But what?" Richard asked, frightened. "The situation is delicate. The next 24 hours are critical," the doctor said. "Is he going to be okay?" Richard asked. Silence. "Doctor, is he going to be okay?" Richard insisted. "We are doing everything we can," she replied. Richard sat in the chair beside the bed, held his father's hand, far too cold. "Dad, you can't—" His voice broke. "Do you know that kind of fear that paralyzes you? The kind you've never felt before because you never had to feel it?" Richard stayed there for hours. Doctors came in, went out, worried looks, whispers in the hallway. 6 in the evening, no improvement. 8 at night, getting worse. 10 at night. The doctor came back. "Mr. Coleman, I'm going to be honest with you. Your father isn't responding the way we hoped. We're increasing the medication, but—" she said, serious. "But," Richard pressed. "We need to prepare ourselves," the doctor said softly. "Prepare for what?" Richard asked, already knowing the answer. "For the possibility that—" she began. "No," Richard said firmly. "Mr. Coleman," the doctor tried. You're not going to say that. You're going to do something." "You're doctors. Do something," Richard said, his voice rising. "We are doing everything," she explained. "It's not enough," Richard shouted. His voice echoed down the hallway. Nurses looked over. The doctor fell silent. Richard took a deep breath. His hands were shaking. I'm sorry, he said, embarrassed. "I understand. I'll leave you alone," the doctor said compassionately. And she left. Richard went back to the chair, took his father's hand again. "You're not leaving. Do you hear me?" "You're not," he whispered. But the machine kept beeping that irregular rhythm that said the opposite. Midnight passed. Richard didn't leave the room. 1 in the morning. 2. His father got worse. Doctors rushed in, adjusted things, new medication. 3 in the morning, he stabilized again, but weak, very weak. "Mr. Coleman, you should try to get some rest," the nurse said gently. "No," Richard replied. "There's a comfortable waiting room. I'll call you if—" she offered. "I said no," Richard said firmly. She nodded and left. Richard stayed. 3:20, 3:30. Have you ever been so tired that you start seeing things differently? He was looking at his father, the machines, the white walls. 3:45. He needed to walk, stretch his legs, or he would lose his mind. He left the room. Empty hallway, fluorescent lights humming softly. He walked to the end of the corridor, turned left, another hallway, even emptier. He stopped, leaned against the wall, closed his eyes. You know that moment when you feel like you can't take even one more second? When it feels like the whole world is weighing on your shoulders? "Please," Richard whispered. He didn't even know who he was talking to. He hadn't spoken to God since when? 20 years? "Please, don't take him yet," he begged. He opened his eyes, and she was there. At the end of the hallway, a woman in blue and white, standing still, looking at him. Richard's heart started beating faster. Richard blinked. She was still there. She didn't move. She just watched him. Her face serene, calm, as if nothing in the world could disturb her, as if she knew exactly what he was going through. "Hello?" he called. She didn't answer. Do Do you need help?" Richard asked. Nothing. Richard took one step, another. She remained there, didn't move. And then he felt it. Peace. There was no other word. It wasn't relief. It wasn't comfort. It was peace. The kind of peace you don't even remember exists. And a smell. Roses. Where would there be roses in a hospital? Richard looked around. No flowers, no open windows, nothing. But the scent was there. Strong. Impossible to ignore. He looked back toward the end of the hallway. Empty. She was gone. He ran. Reached the spot where she had been. No one. No open doors. No sound of footsteps. Nothing. "Hey!" he shouted. "Hey!" A nurse came running. "Mr. Coleman, are you all right?" she asked, concerned. "The woman. Did you see her?" Richard asked, agitated. "What woman?" the nurse said, confused. "She was here, just now. Blue and white." "Did you pass her?" Richard insisted. The nurse looked puzzled. "Sir, I was at the nurse's station. No one passed by me. And this hallway is a dead end. There's only the supply room at the end," she explained. Richard stared at the empty corridor. "But she was here. I saw her," he said firmly. "You've been awake for many hours, maybe," the nurse suggested. "It wasn't tiredness," Richard said loudly. The nurse was startled. Richard took a deep breath. "Sorry, I'm sorry," he said. "Would you like a coffee? Or maybe rest a bit?" she offered. "No, thank you. I'll go back to the room," Richard said. He went back. Slow steps. Racing heart. He entered his father's room, sat in the chair, hands still trembling. The smell of roses was gone. But he still remembered it. So real, so strong, and that peace. That feeling that everything was going to be okay. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. He looked at his father, looked at the door, thought of the woman. Blue and white, like the statue. No. It was exhaustion, stress, fear, hallucination. But the smell was real. The peace was real. She was real. Richard leaned his head against the wall, closed his eyes, and for the first time in decades, he prayed. He didn't know the right words. He didn't remember any prayer. He just whispered, "If you're there, if this was real, please, please, save him." And then something happened that medicine would not be able to explain. 6:15 in the morning. Richard woke with a jolt. He had fallen asleep without realizing it. The room was brighter, sunlight beginning to come through the window. He looked at his father, still unconscious. But the machine, the rhythm had changed. It was no longer that irregular beeping. It was steadier, stronger. The doctor entered. "Mr. Coleman," she said. Richard stood up. "What happened?" Richard asked, hopeful. "He stabilized. During the night, we don't know exactly when, but..." The doctor looked at the monitor. "The heart is responding. It's stronger," she explained. "Is he going to be okay?" Richard asked. "It's still too early to guarantee anything, but it's a good sign, a very good sign," Dr. Sandra replied. Richard sat down again, legs unsteady. "How?" he asked. "Sometimes the body reacts, in ways we don't expect, that we can't fully explain," the doctor said. The doctor left. Richard stayed staring at his father. He remembered the early morning hours, the woman, the scent, the peace. It had been 4 hours ago, and now his father was improving. Coincidence. It had to be coincidence, but he knew. Deep down, he knew it wasn't. Saturday passed slowly. His father continued improving, gradually, but improving. On Sunday, he opened his eyes. "Richard?" The voice was weak, hoarse, but alive. Dad, are you okay?" Richard said, emotional. Where am I?" Robert asked, confused. "Hospital. You had a heart attack. But you're okay. You're going to be okay," Richard explained. Robert tried to smile. "I thought I was gone," he said weakly. "No, you're not getting rid of me that easily," Richard said, trying to smile. His father laughed, weakly, but he laughed. Dr. Sandra came back, examined him, left smiling. "It's not a medical miracle, but it's close," she said quietly to Richard in the hallway. Richard didn't answer. Miracle. The word echoed in his head. Monday, his father was transferred to a regular room. Tuesday, he was sitting up in bed, eating on his own. Wednesday, walking down the hallway with help. The doctors were surprised. Richard returned to school on Thursday. 6 days had passed since the removal of the statue of the Virgin Mary. 6 days since he had seen the woman in the hospital. He couldn't stop thinking about it. He entered the school, crossed the courtyard. The empty pedestal was still there, stained. Something tightened in his chest. He went to the office, tried to work. He couldn't. At noon, he took the car, went to the municipal storage facility. "I'm looking for a statue. It was brought in last Friday from a school," Richard said to the employee. The employee checked the system. "Oh yes, it's in Pavilion C. But sir, it's marked for disposal. It's going to the landfill next week," the employee informed him. "Disposal? No. I want it back," Richard said firmly. "You need authorization from the institution of origin, sir. Fill out forms," the employee explained. "I'm the school's principal. I have authorization," Richard said. The employee hesitated. "But sir, the protocol requires—" He tried. "How long will the process take?" Richard asked. "About 3 to 4 business days," the employee replied. "The statue will be sent to the landfill before that." Richard took a deep breath. "Look, it belongs to the school. It was removed by mistake. I just need to take it back." The employee looked at the computer screen, then at Richard. "Do you have any document proving that you are the principal?" he asked. Richard showed his ID. "All right," the employee sighed. "I'll release it as an emergency retrieval, but you'll have to sign a liability waiver." "No problem," Richard agreed. 20 minutes later, paperwork signed, he was standing in front of the statue in the warehouse, covered in dust, a crack larger than he remembered, peeling paint. But the face, Richard stepped closer, faded blue and white, a serene face, calm. It was the same face, the same expression, the same woman he had seen in the hallway. Richard's legs nearly gave out. It wasn't possible, but it was. He touched the statue, his hand trembled. You were there, at the hospital." "You were," he said, his voice breaking. But he didn't need an answer. He knew. "I'll fix this. I promise," Richard said. Richard spent the next few days researching, phone calls, estimates. He found a restorer in Seattle, specialized in ancient religious pieces. "I need it to be perfect," Richard said. "It's going to be expensive," the restorer warned. "It doesn't matter," Richard replied. Out of his own pocket, the statue was transported. The restoration would take a month. Richard visited his father every day, each day better, each day stronger. "You seem different," his father said one afternoon. "Different how?" Richard asked. "I don't know, lighter." "When was the last time you took a break?" Robert asked. Richard laughed. "It's been a while," he admitted. "You work too much, son. Always have," his father said. "I learned from you," Richard replied. "Yeah, and look where it got me." "Alone in a hospital bed," Robert said. Early December. The statue of the Virgin Mary returned. He opened the packaging in the school's storage room. It was perfect, vibrant blue, bright white. The crack repaired, a new base. He hired a company to reinstall it, reinforce the pedestal, added low lighting for the night. Friday afternoon, the statue returned to its place. Richard stayed at the school alone, watching. The courtyard was empty, the sun setting. He approached, stopped in front of her. "You know those moments when words aren't enough, when all you can do is feel?" "Thank you," he whispered, "for my father, for everything." A light breeze, leaves falling, and then the smell of roses, faint, almost imperceptible. But there, she had returned, and maybe she had never left. Richard closed his eyes, smiled. Monday morning. George arrived early, as always. He stopped in the courtyard. The statue of the Virgin Mary was there. He stood still, mouth open, moved. Margaret arrived shortly after. She saw it, covered her mouth with her hands. The students began to arrive, one by one, stopping, looking. No one knew how, no one knew who. Richard arrived at 8, parked, got out of the car. George came running. "Mr. Coleman, the statue, it came back," George said, agitated. "I saw it," Richard replied, calm. "How? Who?" George asked. "I don't know, George. It appeared," Richard said. "A lie. But a good lie." George looked at the statue, at the principal. Back at the statue. "Thank you," he whispered. Richard nodded. Margaret approached. "Richard," she said, "you did this." It wasn't a question. "I didn't," Richard began. "You did? I know it was you," Margaret said, certain. The two stood in silence. "Why?" she asked softly. Richard looked at the statue, at the serene face. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said. Margaret smiled, gently touched his arm, weeks later. Richard walked past the statue every day, morning and afternoon. Sometimes he stopped, just to look. He never told anyone about the hospital, about the woman, about the smell of roses, because some mysteries don't need explanations. Some things you simply can't know. His father was discharged at Christmas, strong, healthy. The doctors called it an extraordinary recovery. Richard took him home. For the first time in years, Richard didn't work on the holiday. "You really are different," his father said. "I learned that some things are more important than work," Richard replied. "Took you long enough to learn," his father joked. "It did," Richard agreed. They both laughed. January, new semester. Richard was in his office one morning when George knocked on the door. "Mr. Coleman?" George called. "Come in, George," Richard said. The janitor entered, hesitant. I just wanted to thank you for the statue," George said. "You don't need to thank me, George," Richard replied. "I do need to." "You didn't have to, but you did it anyway. And that means a lot," said the janitor, moved. Richard nodded. "She belongs here. She always did," Richard said. George smiled. He left. Richard went back to the computer, but he stopped. He looked out the window. The statue was there, arms open, sunlight shining on it, and for the first time in a very long time, Richard felt at peace. Before we finish, I want to invite you to be part of our prayer community to the Virgin Mary, a space of faith and hope where people from all over the world come together to pray and share graces received. If you feel in your heart the desire to be part of this prayer chain, click below and become a channel member today, and come pray with us. And look, if you made it this far, to the very end of Richard's story, do one thing for me. Write roses in the comments, the scent that changed everything in that early morning. I want to see how many hearts this story truly reached. And every time I read that word in the comments, I'll know that one more person believes that miracles of the Virgin Mary still happen. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Write in the comments about a miracle you have already witnessed or experienced, and share this video with someone who needs to renew their hope today. May the Virgin Mary continue blessing and protecting you and your family. Amen.